I think that local food is quite similar to local stories, actually, because when you think about it, they have some things in common. Both local food and local stories come from the ground beneath us. They come from the earth beneath us. And sometimes to find local food and local stories, especially on a summer holiday island like Ibiza, you have to dig. And sometimes it's hard work. And sometimes it is a labour of love. And sometimes it's a labour of blood and sweat and tears. But I think you all know that it's worth it. So I think we can all agree that we've filled our bellies with the most incredible food from the earth. Should we fill our hearts and our minds now with a little story from Ibiza?
Yes.
I didn't hear you.
Yes.
Much, much better. So, to find our locally sourced story, we're going to travel just a little bit further south to Ibiza town. Now, do you all know the little bit of rock that sticks out near the port of Ibiza town called Sapenia? Mm-hmm. Now, Sapenia is quite famous on Ibiza today because it's the neighbourhood of the gypsy people. But you know, back several centuries ago, it wasn't the neighbourhood of the gypsy people, it was the neighbourhood of the fishermen. And that is where our story begins. So, in the neighbourhood of Sapenia, many centuries ago, there lived 3 fishermen's wives called, how much mezcal have I had and can I remember their names? They were called Mariquita, Catalineta and Antonina. And we meet them tonight on a night not so different to the night that we have tonight. There's a storm raging on Ibiza. It's early February. It's been one of those storms that hangs over the Balearic Islands for days. You can see the thunderbolts hitting Formentera, hitting the lighthouse, and it's a time to be deep indoors. But you know, these 3 fishermen's wives, they are going through a very, very difficult time because several days ago their husbands went fishing in the strait between Ibiza and Mallorca, and they have not returned. For 3 days and for 3 nights, these poor women's husbands have not returned. And there arrived a day when one of these fishermen's wives said to the others, this shit is getting serious. We need to go up to Delt Villa and we need to light a candle in the convent because, you know, they've been away for a long time and I think the time has come. Shall we light the candle? And they all just nodded because this was a very serious situation. So they put their thickest shawls on because there was this storm battering the island. They went outside of their little houses in Sapenia, they waddled up together, huddling closely up the hill towards the cathedral, and they went to the convent, and they each lit a candle, and they spent many hours praying with their heart and soul for the safe return of their fishermen husbands. Now, many, many hours later, night was falling, but you know, the weather was so terrible you couldn't even tell if it was night or day. That was how bad this storm was. But anyway, they came out of the convent several hours later, they walked down the hill again, and they hoped to get back to their homes very, very quickly, until suddenly Mariquita stubbed her toe on something, and she stubbed it so badly that she let out a little squeal like, ah, mierda! And Catalineta, who was near her at the time, looked down, and through the rain and through the bad weather, she could make out a heavy sack lying in the middle of the cobbled street. Meanwhile, Antonina, she didn't say a word. She just picked up the sack. You know why? Because she was quite clever. When Mariquita's foot hit the sack, Antonina heard a jangling sound. And she was like, this sack is coming home with us. So the 3 ladies huddled from the storm and they went back down to Antonina's house. But just before they arrived there, there was a sailor standing at the door waiting for the women. He had news about their husbands, and he said, "Ladies, housewives, I come to tell you that your husbands are safe and well. They got caught in this terrible, terrible storm near Andratx in Mallorca, and their boat is very, very badly damaged, and they're going to need to be there for another night and another day while they fix the boat. But please, please be sure that they are alive and well." So, of course, these three women, they got down on their knees and they serenaded this man for the good news that he had given them. And once the sailor had disappeared, they kind of looked at each other and got up and brushed the mud off their knees, and they were like, "Anyway, the sack?" So they went into Antonina's house. Antonina slammed the sack onto the table because they wanted to know what was in the sack. And yes, you're right. When she pulled open the string, out poured golden coins. I mean, dozens and dozens of golden coins. The sack was full of money. And Antonina stood there for a while in silence, and then she started muttering old ibicenco, and it was something along the lines of, "Finally, my luck has come. I'm rich." And then Antonina felt a gentle hand on her shoulder, and it was her dear old friend Catalineta, who said, "Dear, dear sister, don't you mean we are going to be rich? I mean, I know that you picked up the sack, but I was the one who saw it." And at that point, Mariquita came and gently embraced both of her dear old friends around each shoulder and said, "Ladies, hang on a minute. My toe right now is 5 times its normal size because my foot was the thing that first made contact with this sack. The money is mine." Anyway, you can see where this is going. These 3 old friends were getting into a bit of an argument, and they couldn't settle it. On and on it went into the night, and they had no resolution. So at some point in the early hours of the morning, I think it was about 3 a.m, they thought, right, we need to go and get another opinion. We're going to go and find the judge. He lives up in the posh house up towards the cathedral. Let's go and find him now. So the storm was still raging, the rain was still pouring. The 3 ladies once again put their shawls over their heads, and they waddled up the hill to Delvilla to find the judge. Now the judge, you might be surprised to find, he was quite a kind of fun-loving guy, you know. He wasn't what you would expect of a judge from 2 centuries ago. He opened the door. It was 3 o'clock in the morning. He had some kind of pipe in his hand, and he just laughed. He's like, what are you ladies doing? And they explained the situation to him. He took a long drag of his pipe, and then he was like, "Okay, yep, I've got it. I know what you're going to do. Give me the sack. In 4 days, come back to me, and I want to know which of you has pulled the best trick on your husband, okay? The one who's pulled the best joke on your husband gets the sack of coins. But this is serious. It's only meant to be a joke. So if your husband gets really pissed off, it doesn't count, okay? You don't win the money, only if it's a joke where your husband doesn't get mad." Slammed the door shut. So the 3 ladies waddled back down the hill, disappeared off into their own houses, because now, you know, teamwork, forget it. This was all about looking after number 1. Each of these ladies had to figure out what they were going to do. So the next day, round about sunset, finally this horrifying storm began to kind of subside a little bit, and a little slant of the sunset came through the clouds, and at that moment a ship rolled into the port of Ibiza town. My word, it was a little fishing yacht. It looked terrible. The mast was broken, the sail was ripped, the rudder wasn't working properly, and there were 3 men on board, and of course it was the fishermen. They had finally arrived, these heroes of Sapenia. So they arrived into the port, and one by one the fishermen themselves returned home to their wives. Now, the first fisherman who arrived to his wife was Toniet, the husband of Mariquita. Now, when Toniet opened the door of his house, exhausted, you know, he was covered in sweat and dirt, like layers and layers of it. His clothes were ripped. He had guts of fish and blood all over his clothes. You know, he'd been through crazy, crazy stuff on the seas. He opened the door, and he found his wife, Mariquita, sitting in a chair, weeping and sobbing inconsolably. My Toniette! I should have gone instead of him. The Lord should have taken me instead of him, my dear Toniette. We had our whole lives ahead of us. Well, Toniette was obviously a little bit surprised. He was like, wife, it's me, I'm here, I'm alive, what are you talking about? And she just looked into the distance through her streams of tears, and she just said, alive? You're as dead as a dodo. And she carried on crying. Toniette was like, wife, I'm getting a bit angry with you now. You're either absolutely drunk, have you been drinking all this time that we've been away, or have you finally gone completely mad? And now, well, she got even more upset and she said, in my darkest hour, you, whoever you are, you come and make me suffer like this. Toniette. Well, at this point, Toniette just didn't know what to say. His mouth was hanging open, but he didn't need to say anything because in came Mariquita's mother, grandmother, cousins, aunts. All of her relatives from Ibiza town came in crying, weeping. Oh, Toniette, he was such a good man. He was such a brave man. They were all in on her joke, of course. Now, at this point, you know, it was all a bit much for Toniette. He'd not slept very much for the last couple of days. He'd been through a lot. And to be honest, he didn't know what was going on. He passed out, straight there on the floor. And at that point, the undertakers arrived to organise the funeral. So the undertakers came and they lay Toniette carefully on the bed. Now, Toniette, he'd basically just fallen asleep. I mean, the poor guy, he'd been so tired, he'd been through so much, he was just having a good old sleep and he didn't know what was going on. So the undertakers, they decorated the bed with flowers, and then a little bit later they gently laid him in the coffin, and they lit 4 candles around the edge, and they began to organise Toniette's funeral. Now, meanwhile, the second fisherman arrived home. Now, he was Lorenz, the husband of Catalineta. So when he arrived home, he opened the door expecting his wife, you know, rosy-cheeked with loaves of bread for him, and instead she was just standing there staring at him looking really, really unhappy. And he said, wife, what's wrong? What's the matter? And she said, it's Toniette. Didn't you hear? He's dead. And he just, to be honest, Lorenz just laughed. He said, Toniette was with me half an hour ago helping me to fix the fishing nets. What do you mean he's dead? Like, this is ridiculous. And she said, no. Mariquita just called up from down the road. She said that he's dead. So we're going to have to go to his funeral. And to be honest, Lorenz, I'm really annoyed that you never seem to have the proper clothes for the right occasions. I've been looking through all of your cupboards, all of your clothes. You have no black clothes suitable for a funeral. And this is your dearest friend. So what are we going to do about it? Well, Lorenz was just standing there in a state of, you know, absolute shock and confusion. And he didn't know what to say, so his wife carried on talking. She said, listen, I know what we're going to do. I found a couple of items of yours which are actually black. I found this little hat of yours, and I found these black sandals. And I think now you just need to take off all of your clothes. So Lorenz, well, he was a bit confused. He took off all of his clothes. And his wife put his little black hat on him, and the little sandals, and she got a black tin of paint, and she painted it black from head to toe. And then she said, now give me 5 minutes, Lorenz, I need to get ready for the funeral as well. So off she went into her bedroom, she dressed up a bit, and then they went arm in arm to the funeral. And, you know, you can imagine this was a strange thing in 18th century Ibiza. They turned up at the funeral and the people were staring at them and pointing and, you know, basically, what was her name? Catalineta said to them, He's gone a bit nuts, just let him be. It's fine. So they arrived to the funeral began, and of course the time arrived for everyone to show their respects by throwing a little bit of soil over the coffin, as is the tradition. And when it came to Lorenz's turn, well, to be honest, the poor man, he was in such a state of shock. He was freezing cold. It was February and he was absolutely naked. Everyone was staring at him and pointing at him. So he didn't really do what he was supposed to do. And his wife pinched his arm and said, come on, throw the stones onto the coffin. And, well, he lost it. He just said, I'm sick of you telling me what to do. And he got a biggish pebble and he chucked it onto the coffin. And of course, the knocking sound of that pebble on the top of the coffin woke up Toniette, who was just having a lovely old nap. So Toniette lifted up the lid of the coffin, stuck his head out, looked around, and, well, to be honest, he was at his own funeral, which seemed a little bit strange, but now it became clear to him. He was breathing, so therefore he wasn't dead. Something ridiculous was going on, and it wasn't quite right. So as Toniette climbed out of the coffin, all of the funeral guests ran off screaming, terrified, and the only people who were left in the cemetery were Laurence and Toniette. And there was a moment of silence when these two old friends looked at each other, and Toniette said to Laurence, listen, Laurence, friend, carnival season doesn't start for another couple of weeks. Why are you dressed like that? Why are you painted, all painted? And then he said, well, why have you just been taking part in your own funeral? And the answer that both of these men had was, of course, my wife has something to do with it. Anyway, we haven't met the final fisherman. So the final fisherman was Pep. Now, he took a very, very long time fixing up the boat in the port of Ibiza town. And when he finally went up to his home and he opened the door of his dear wife, Antonina, well, she wasn't in the living room, so he went through into the bedroom. And there she was, rocking backwards and forwards in bed, and she was groaning and she was clutching her stomach and she was saying, Pep, I'm really, really ill. I'm not good at all. All of the doctors of Sapenia have said to me that they don't know what they can do for me. Pep, please go to Figueretas and find a healer for me. So, of course, Pep, he was very, very tired from his journey, from his adventures, but he rushed out of the house into the rain again. He sprinted around the edge of Dult Villa. He went down to Figueretas and he found the healer. And, this healer was sort of like the well-to-do healer of Ibiza town. He was quite, well-to-do. Don't sort of disrespect him. So he opened the door, and when he saw that it was pouring down with rain, and when Pep told him, I need you to come to Sapenia to treat my wife, please, he said, listen, I'm sorry, but unless you can get a horse and cart for me, I'm not going out in this weather. And Pep said, well, listen, the time that it's going to take me to go and get a horse and cart and bring it back here, I'm sorry, my wife, there might not be enough time for that. Why don't you just get onto my back? So the healer, he was a small little man, delicate little man, he gently lifted up his robes off the ground and he popped onto Pep's back, and Pep sprinted back again to Sapenia to go and treat his wife at last. But now Antonina, really, her imagination had no limits, because while Pep had gone to find the healer, Antonina had went upstairs and she'd hung a white bedsheet over the door of their house. And of course, all of the houses in Ibiza are brilliant, brilliant white. And this was a dark night, there was no moon, it was bad weather. So poor Pep came back, he couldn't find his house. He was wandering around the streets of Sapenia with this little old man asleep on his back, and he was knocking at all of the doors saying, do you know where Pep's house is? Do you know where Pep's house is? And of course, they got more and more annoyed with him, and finally one of them said, listen, we're sick of drunken hooligans wandering around the streets of Ibiza, just go off. So then he went to another house, and one of the parents' children had climbed up to the upstairs window and threw a flower pot out of the window onto his head. Then he went to another house and they set a dog on him, which chased him down to the end of the street. So finally, in the early hours of the morning, poor Pep, so exhausted, he finally found Antonina's house. She had finally decided that the joke had gone far enough and she had taken away the bedsheet. And she stood there on the doorstep and she said, Pep, I could have died hours ago. Why did you take so long? And she chased him down the end of the street with a broom. So imagine this poor man. He must have been in a state of absolute delirium, exhaustion, confusion, shock. What is going on? He ran through the rain and he finally saw, or crashed into, his two old friends, Laurence, Antoniette. And, you know, these three men, they'd been through a lot together on the high seas. There was a deep understanding between these three men. And so when they found each other in that little alleyway of Sapenia, there was a moment of silence between them. There was Toniette, wearing his wedding outfit from 30 years ago, which was way too small for him. There was Laurence, absolutely naked at the beginning of February, painted black from head to toe, wearing a little black felt cap and some black sandals. And there, beside him, was Pep, who had a little old man with long flowing robes, sleeping on his back, snoring gently. And, you know, I think it goes without saying that these three men knew that someone or some people had played a very big trick on them. And I think that it was fairly clear who those individuals were. So I suppose you all want to know how this story ends. Which of the housewives won the sack of money? Was it Mariquita? Was it Catalineta? Or was it Antonina? And, you know, you might not be so surprised to know that neither of them won. It was pretty clear to the judge and to every single inhabitant of not only Sapenia, but Ibiza town, that that night there were some very pissed off men wandering around Sapenia. But you know what? I like to think that actually those three women, they didn't care so much that they didn't win that sack of money, because you know what they did end up with was a story that they laughed about for years and years and years afterwards. And you know what? They told their children. Their children told the same story to their children. Their children told the same story to their children. And it got passed down the generations. And you know what? One of their great-great-great-great-grandchildren was in Eroski in the queue about 3 days ago, the one opposite Fita. She's about 80 years old, and the service was really slow, and she told me this story herself. So I think that's where we're going to leave Mariquita, Catalineta, and Antonina, and that is where I'm going to leave all of you. Sorry, it's a bit of a dark story. Maybe I should have warned you.
It was so good. Good.
There's no airy-fairiness in Ibizan old stories. They're very dark, bad sense of humour, violent, morbid. So yeah.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Christian.
Nice, Christian. Thank you, Ruby.
Thank you, Ruby.
And thank you to the team. Hey, everybody.
Thank you.
That was fun. And thank you to Nick and Joanna.
Yay! Yeah, thank you.
And to Sophie.
Yay! And to all of us for helping revive this agricultural revolution on Ibiza.
Yeah.
Whether we're farming or buying or singing.
So now you're welcome to take the lanterns and bring them back with you to guide the way. And you leave them in the parking and we'll take care of them.
That's so sweet.
So you have a pleasant night walk.
Can we